Alright, so in this video I'm going to show you how to use expressions to control certain text elements on your After Effects slate. So we're going to be doing things like the shot number, the length, the size, the date, and even a frame counter and the head and tail handles. So if those apply to you, I have a pretty intuitive way to visually determine where those handles should be. So most of this is pretty straightforward. Some of the expressions towards the end are going to be a little bit long-winded, but if you specifically are only interested in this basic stuff, then that will be the first part of the video. Okay, so for my students who are watching this, just note that I have a class listed here, and this is for you. Instead of using project, we call it class just to differentiate between the various classes of the animation program. But for everybody else, I'm going to be calling this project because it makes a lot more sense to do so. I also denote the project in the shot number, so that's probably not very common for everybody else. So what we're looking at here is a slate that I use for my students at the college that I work at. And this is also the same template that I used while I was working as a visual effects artist as well. So this displays all the relevant information that you need about your shot, and also has a data overlay too. So if we play this video, you can see this shot here. So this is just some fun project I did for my students, and if you look at the bottom left-hand corner, we have the frame counter, and then the bottom right-hand corner, we have the shot name and version number. So these are two vital components that we need for our slate. And at the very end of the video, I'm also going to be showing you how you can change the color of your frame counter to match whatever, or to be the opposite of whatever color passes underneath of it. So if you have something that gets really, really bright, if you didn't change the color, your frame counter would be nearly unreadable. Or if you had something really, really dark and your frame counter was also dark, it would be unreadable. So there's a way that we can script that so it changes. Okay, so the first section, we need to create a template in either After Effects or in Photoshop. And I'm not going to show you that because it's pretty straightforward to do. I made mine in Photoshop. Let me go over here. So it's just a very simple, I used Full HD, so 1920 by 1080. Obviously use the resolution that you're required to use. Alright, so the only important thing to note here is the RGB, CMYK, and then I have 50% gray, 100% white, and 100% black. So these values are simply for reference purposes. So if you're working on a monitor that has really poor color management, or you're working in some different color space and your colors of your shot look really bizarre, you might refer back to this first slide or this slate, and you can say, well, that is supposed to be 100% red. Is it for you? Or something like that. So this is why we have these colors here. Okay, so I'm just going to save this as a PSD, which I already have done. It doesn't really matter what format you use. And like I said before, you could do this in After Effects. I just prefer to make this in Photoshop. Okay, so let's go into After Effects and then go and find that image. So since it's a PSD, it's going to ask us what to do with it. Just leave it at footage and then merge layers is fine. And the next thing, we're going to make a new comp, make this 1920 by 1080, and I'm going to use 24 FPS. Now again, if you're a student and you're in the class that requires 30 FPS, use 30 FPS, but for everybody else, I'm just going to use 24 frames per second. Alright, so let's type in 999 here, and what this is for is to make this hopefully as big as you'll ever need your slate to be. So I've never worked on a shot that's more than 999 frames, but if it was more than that, you just extend your comp and then pull out all your layers. So this saves a little bit of time just by making this larger than it probably ever needs to be. Okay, let's click OK. Let's grab our slate and pull it down here. And let me zoom out to 100%. Okay, so the next step would be in After Effects to write out some text. We need text layers for all of these things. So even though that we're going to be creating an expression to determine what's in the text, we still need a layer. So I'm going to do Control T, and first one, I'm just going to type in the project name. These are things you're going to have to do manually. So things like the sequence description. This is going to be just a phrase or some kind of descriptive sentence that says what is this shot? What sequence is this shot in? Just so you and or the editor or the client, everyone remembers what this is for. So on larger projects, it's a little bit easier to keep track of. Okay, and let me just reorder these really quickly. So we're going to have the shot number, and anything that is going to be automatic, I'm going to write these two caret symbols. I'm going to do output name, And then I'm going to do one for length. Okay, I'm going to do size. And then the artist, that's me, or you, or whatever. That's not going to change probably. And if it does, it's something you're going to have to update once for that slate. Let's put these back in line. And then we're going to do one for the date. And again, this is going to be automatic as well. Okay, so the first set of expressions are actually really quite simple. Let's do the shot number first. So I'm just going to reorganize these so that they're in the same order. So we got my name here, the size is below the length. Okay, that just matches. Okay, and what we're going to do is go to the output name. Let's do that one first. Open up the layer, go to text, and on the source text, it has a stopwatch next to it, and anything with a stopwatch means that it can be animated, or you could add an expression to it. So you're going to alt-click on the source text, and then we can type in your text here. And I know this is really small on the screen, so I'm going to bring up Notepad++, and then you can see the code that I'm typing in a little bit better. So the first step, we're going to use the shot number. So this is going to be this comp.name. And this is based on JavaScript, but in After Effects, you don't need to put the semicolon. If you do, it doesn't really matter. I'm not going to, but if you happen to know any JavaScript, just be aware that you don't actually need the semicolon. And I'm going to paste that in right there. So what this is doing, it's going to take the name of this composition and replace it with the shot name. So let me right click over the composition settings, and I'm going to change this to something like the previous example I showed you. So usually the prefix of your project, followed by either like the season number or episode name or whatever specific show you're working on, or whatever shot number this is. For my students, we usually denote it with the class, followed by the project, and then the version number at the end. Whoops. So if I update that, then it changes here. Okay, so we're going to also copy this in a moment to do the data overlay, but let's do the rest of this first. Okay, so let's open up length, and for length, we're going to do the same thing. Alt-click on the source text, then I'm going to pop back over into Notepad++ and write this next section. So what we're going to do, two sets of parentheses, and then one divided by this comp.duration. Oh, sorry, frame duration, my mistake, frame duration. And then we're going to multiply that by this comp.duration. And just to show you what that does just by itself, let's paste this in. You can see that returns how many frames are in the entire composition. And that's pretty useful, but generally we don't include the slate with the shot length. So what we need to do is then subtract one from that, and then we need to actually add on like that string, some actual words that say the frames plus the slate, because we usually just say, well, however many frames the slate is, if that's 1 or if that's 2 or whatever, that's not included in the actual shot. So let's pop back over into here, do -1, and then we're going to say plus, open quotes, frames plus the slate. And this is just a more standard way of writing how many frames are actually in the shot but not including the slate. So there we go. All right, let's do the size. And the size is also really straightforward. Let's just click on the source text, I'll click on that, go back into Notepad++, and this is going to be this comp.width, and then I'm going to do a plus, and then we usually have a X separator in between the two numbers there, so 1920 by 1080, and plus, whoops, this comp.height. Copy that, and then paste that in here. Okay, so just to see, that's calculating the number of frames. Now if I change that, I can change both of these. I could say, well, I want to have 2000 frames, and I want to change this to 2K. So, and although it makes everything larger, you can see that these numbers have updated. Backspace out of that. Okay, so next is the date. Now the date is going to be a little bit longer, but it's fairly straightforward. I'll click on the stopwatch and pop back over into Notepad++. All right, so I'm going to type in today equals, and I'm going to make a copy of the date object. And in standard JavaScript, you can just do this and it will actually return the milliseconds since January 1st, 1970, but After Effects does not allow this as is. You have to actually add in another date and then give it a parameter of 0, and then it will work. And this here can be whatever you want. You could say D, you could do D, you could do date, whatever. So let's just do today, because that makes sense. And then I'm going to enter down, and then I'm going to do today.getMonth. And I live in the US, so we put our month first. And this always starts at 0, so January would be 0, so we need to actually add 1 to that, otherwise it's going to return the wrong number. And I actually don't need a parentheses there. And then we're going to do a dash or like a slash or something. So anything that's a string is going to be denoted by the quotes. And then we need a today.getDate. So this is going to return the day. And then we're going to do another dash. And then today.get the full year. Let me copy both of those and paste this in the text. So this is April 17th, 2017. Now the one issue here is usually you have a leading 0 on the 4, or if today was the 9th or something, we'd have 09. So in order to do that, we have to make a function that will add a 0 padding to these numbers that are less than 10. So it's actually really simple to do, and I'll show you that section too. Okay, so I'm going to make a new function, and I'm going to define that as pad 0 with the parameter of n, open curly braces, close them, and then we're going to make a conditional statement. So I'm going to say if n is less than 10, we're going to return 0 plus n. Not new, definitely n. And then else return just n. So n in this case is going to be whatever this value is, or whatever this value is. So we're going to pass this through this function. So I'm going to copy pad 0, put it in front of these, passing that through as the parameter, and then pad 0, include it there. And then we don't need one for the year because the year is already 4 digits, and that's fine. So copy that and paste it into here. So now you get your leading 0. So that's a neat way of finishing off that date expression. Okay, so we have now the main sections of the slate. Again, the project name and sequence description, these are things that you're going to have to manually add to your project, but you only have to do it once, and then for any other version number, everything else will update, even if the length changes, for instance. Okay, so generally our slate is only going to be 1 frame long. So on frame 0, our slate's there, and then after that, it's just data overlay for the rest. So I'm going to collapse all these layers, and then I'm going to select all of them, including the background, and then I'm going to click the Alt and then the right bracket key. And what this is going to do is going to trim all those frames down to that 1 frame. And then let me zoom in on the timeline, and you can see that it's occupying 1 frame. And the next frame, we just have nothing. So it's just completely transparent. Right, so the next step, we're going to add a frame counter. So I'm going to add a new text. I'm going to call this frames. You don't really have to write anything here. It's just kind of for reference. And make sure that your text is left aligned. And to check, go to paragraph. If you don't see character or paragraph, go up to Windows and make sure that those are on. So on the paragraph, you need to make sure everything is left aligned. Otherwise, your numbers, as they go to 10 or 100, they'll be pushed off the screen. Okay, so let's do that one. And I'm also going to make another one over here. I'm going to call this again the shot number, because you want to have your shot number running on the bottom as well. Okay, now the opposite is true for this. So we need this to be right aligned. Otherwise, if your shot number name gets too long, it will also go off the screen. Okay, and for both of those, I'm going to make the transparency, let's say 50%. You don't want these to be really, really large or really, really noticeable. I mean, even this right here is probably a little bit large. I could probably make that 24, and I could probably make this 24 as well for the size. You want it to be pretty subtle and not interfering with anything in the shot. Okay, right, so for the I'll go back to the shot number actually, because we've already done that expression. So if you go into the output name, go back into the source text, you can just copy this comp.name, and we're going to paste that on the source text of the shot number. So I'll click the source text and paste that in. And there you go. There's your shot number again. So this is referring to whatever the comp is called. All right, so for the frame counter, and you could actually call this layer frame counter. Let's go into the text, right click on, or alt click on source text, then go back into Notepad++, and the expression is going to be time divided by this comp.frame duration. Copy that and paste that in text. So we start on frame 1, 2, 3, 4. So the important thing to know is this number here needs to match whatever is on your time code. And if you see your time code on the top but you want it to be switched, you can hold down the Control key, and that will switch the time code to the bottom and your frames up to the top. Okay, we're nearly done now with the basic expressions. The one thing is that on frame 0, your frame counter and your data overlay, which you probably can't see there, is white, really shouldn't be visible. Let's go forward 1 frame, select the shot number and the frame counter, and then this time we're going to do Alt left bracket to trim it up to that frame 1. So on frame 0 they're off, and then frame 1 we see them count up. Okay, so that wraps up the simple expressions, and now let's move on to some of the more complicated ones.